Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Limbus Company video. Today we're going to be doing the Mirror Dungeon normal mode, while using only the final boss identities, specifically. And it's interesting to note that even though we're 9 cantos deep at this point, we only have 4 identities that are the final bosses of said cantos. Which is like, you know, 4 out of 9, it's not the greatest percentage, but you have to keep in mind that also, technically speaking, the first 2 cantos don't really have a final boss. So really it's closer to 4 out of 7, which it is technically speaking above 50% percentage-wise at that point, but even still, we have about a 50% chance of getting a final boss for any future cantos at this rate. And for some of them, it's like, it makes sense why we wouldn't get them. Because, for example, Canto 7, Don Quixote doesn't really make sense for us to get, especially because, you know, the main identity for that canto was actually Sancho, a second kindred. So getting a first kindred just doesn't really make sense. Especially because there's nobody who really fits for Don Quixote anyways, other than, you know, Don Quixote herself. But she has the Sancho identity, so can't really give a final boss for that. And it's the same thing with Canto 8 as well, where the final boss of that is a decrepit old woman who only is really a boss because she eats all of the boluses. So it's like, getting an identity of that just doesn't make sense, you know? And basically that basically means that it makes sense that we wouldn't get a final boss for every canto, because the identities that fit for them don't fit for any of the sinners, basically. The only final boss that we could have potentially gotten and didn't is Farmwatch, which, you know, that was a whole thing, let me just say that much, but I don't know, it's kind of whatever that we don't have him, to be honest. A little disappointing for sure. Would have made this team stronger, slightly, but not necessary. Honestly though, it's not really that big of a deal that Project Moon has decided to not give us a whole lot of final boss identities. Like, even just ignoring the fact that most of the final bosses, or I should say, most of the final bosses that we didn't get don't really fit for us to get as an identity. I do like the fact that we've basically gotten other bosses instead of them. Ones that are more fitting, like Canto 8 is the biggest example, with us getting both Lei Hang and Jia Q, right? We got both of the most powerful identities that we could have gotten in that canto. And in my opinion, that's a lot more interesting than if we just got the final boss and nothing else. So it would have been a little cool to get the final boss for those cantos, but ultimately, I think it's better that we didn't. Especially because from a lore perspective, it fits better for the sinners who own unique storylines, you know what I mean? Especially Canto 7 with Don Quixote. It would make no sense for her to get, you know, actual Don Quixote. Anyways, as for the identities that we actually have, obviously, with how we're on Canto 9 right now, and aside from Yusong, the next closest one is Canto 6. So that's a whole 3 cantos where we just didn't get anything, basically. Well, 2, technically, but that's beside the point. And it just goes to show the real power creep that has been introduced in this game so far. Because Yusong is just... he is a mile above everybody else in this team. And that's not to say that these identities are particularly bad. I would still consider them to be pretty decent. I mean, Ishmael, she's got good clash power. She also has a pretty strong gimmick with the ability to force any identity to use an extra skill 1, so she'll always be, at the very least, usable, and pretty good, too. And then Faust, She's not the strongest, but she is a pretty good bleed identity, so she has something she can do at the very least. And she has a very, very powerful passive as well. One of the strongest sanity healing effects in the game. But other than that, they don't really do much. So that basically means that Heathcliff is the only one who can realistically keep up in terms of, like, things beyond pure support, I mean. And it's because he just has a lot more going on in his kit, you know? He's got his anti-stagger with mounting Dullahan, and then the ability to spam his skill 3 every other turn, because he can do that if he has high sanity and he's on Dullahan. And then he also has attack weight on his skill 2, and the ability to revive characters for a single turn. I think also 2 turns, I can't remember if they're specifically something I don't remember. Point is, he's got a lot going on, and that makes him much, much better than the other 2 characters. And frankly speaking, it does allow him to keep up with Yi-Song. I mean, granted, there's no way he's even close to the same power level as Yi-Song, but he does do quite a few things that Yi-Song doesn't do. The most notable being he actually has real attack weight on his skill 2. Like, that's probably the biggest difference between the 2 of them, is Heathcliff has actual attack weight, and Yi-Song doesn't. And also, the fact that he can spam his skill 3 every other turn means that his damage is, I'd say, equal. It makes it pretty equal, because Yi-Song has a lot more damage modifiers, mostly because he's a poise identity, and he also because he's indexed, so it's like, he just has a lot of damage modifiers in his kit, and that makes him, even though he can't spam his skill 3 every turn, it makes it so that he does actually do a decent amount of damage, similar to Heathcliff. Of course, with all that said, Heathcliff is also a kind of a weird identity, where he kind of is reliant on a specific ego gift of rags, which basically makes it so that whenever he uses his skill 3, which is a negative coin skill, it reduces his sanity so that it has more consistent rolling coins. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. They're both strong. Yi-Song's obviously better because he's a newer identity. But Heathcliff is still pretty good. But yeah, anyway, despite all of that, all of these identities are pretty good. They're very usable. They're still decently strong, although not nearly as strong as some of the newer identities, but they can hold their own. And really, that's all you can really ask for at this point for older identities. Honestly, when it comes to this particular run in and of itself, and I don't think I'm going to be showing the final floor because, frankly speaking, it's not that interesting, and I don't really have much else to say that could fill the time, so we're only gonna show the end of this fight, and that's basically it. But anyways, for this particular run, there were a couple of issues that I ran into. Well, not really issues, but more like minor challenges, I guess, that normally you wouldn't really think of when using these identities. But one of them had to do with Ishmael, specifically with her unique sanity, right? Because she has this unique effect where she loses sanity if somebody other than her kills an enemy. And for fights like, you know, the Night of Despair or any real big bosses that don't really have many smaller enemies, this isn't that big of a deal. But up until this point, we were basically fighting mob fights because, I don't know, I like them more in the early Mirror Dungeon anyways. I feel like it does a better showcase of the identity's true power if you're using them in the mob fights, and also it makes it easier to actually build up the unique identity's status effects, or I should say their abilities, because, you know, Heathcliff, he gains his coffin upon killing enemies, and if you're in a fight like the Night of Despair, there's no real enemies for him to kill, and so his build-up is particularly slow here. Not impossible, because he also gains it through using his skill 3, And because he can spam that every other turn, it's not terrible, but it becomes a lot easier if there are a lot more weak enemies for him to kill. And because he needs to be the one that kills them, that means that Ishmael is not killing them, and thus her sanity gets reduced, and she's always at low sanity. It's definitely a little complicated. And then also the fact that Yi-Song is very strong too, that also contributes to the fact that her sanity just constantly gets lowered and lowered. So, that was definitely a bit of a minor problem. It's not that bad though, because she also regains a lot of sanity herself if she does kill it, so as long as you manage it just a little bit, it's pretty easy to deal with. And the second problem that I ran into is specifically with Yi-Song and building up his Furioso. It's not that bad to do, but unless he's in Unlock Stage 2, he cannot gain the 9th stack to be able to actually use Furiosa, the 9th stack of his Procuration Hermes. So it's like, in those minor fights, the only way for him to actually build up Unlock is if he's using his marked skills. And it becomes particularly slow to do that because he cannot guarantee to attack the Prescript's target in those fights. And thus, it takes him quite a while to actually build up and reach the Unlock Stage 2 required to get the 9th stack. It's not that big of a problem though, because he could just use his defense skill once and then he would instantly reach that level. But I just never did it because, I don't know, I didn't want to or something. Doesn't really matter that much, especially because there was a very easy way around it. But it was still a minor issue, I guess, to say the least, even though it was entirely a self-inflicted one, because I could have just used his defense skill like once, and then we would have used more than a single Furiosa in this entire run. But what can you do? He's the strongest identity on the field. Of course he's gonna kill everybody before he can use his gimmick. But even if he's the strongest identity on the field, he's not the strongest character. That's my queen. I love her.
있는 힘껏 찔러놓고 웃겨놨지만 저것들은 언젠가 다시 재생하겠지.
완벽하게 수행되었지 않은가. 하지만 아직 기약은 없구려. 그렇다면 여전히 난 아무것도 인가.
And yeah, that's how I beat Mirror Dungeon Normal, using only the final boss identities that we currently have access to. Pretty easy because Yi-Song's one of them and he's ridiculously overpowered. Well, overpowered is debatable. I don't really think he's that overpowered. I mean, he is, but like, what am I saying? He's, I don't know. He's overpowered, but he's also kind of balanced. So it's like, it's warranted overpoweredness, you know what I mean? But anyways, yeah, that's it for me. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.